Hi, flutists. I am happy to be back with you again for another video, and I'm going to talk to you today about your extremes of range, low notes and high notes, fingerings, producing the low and high register notes, and problems you might encounter with some of those notes and with your intonation, and also a little bit about vibrato. So it's important that every time you practice your flute, that you play your entire range, every note you know, and if you can, expand that range. If you haven't learned all 37 possible notes, we have a 3-octave range on the flute from middle C up to high C. So it's important that you're playing always down to your lowest note, a low C or B natural, and up to your highest note, which is hopefully a high C. If you're not there yet, you can add a note every couple of days, and there's probably only about 5 notes at the top of the range that you haven't learned the fingerings for yet. So the first thing that I do, my twiddle, when I begin practicing is often a chromatic figure going down into the low register. And a great thing to be able to do is to just play your chromatic scale from middle C in the staff down to your low C, something like this. Right? And if you have a low B, you push forward one more note onto a roller. Go ahead and play that note. It's terrific if you can do that one in one breath, descending. And make sure your flute is working well. All of these notes come out. I have here 2 different flute foot joints to show you. So I'm holding a C foot joint, and you can see that it's a little bit shorter. And I have right now on my flute a B foot joint, which has one extra key here and the extra roller here for the pinky. No big deal. Some of you probably have a C foot joint flute and some of you have a B foot joint flute. The B is not really important. We don't use it a lot, but if you have a B foot joint, you should play that note every day because it makes your low C and your D flat easier. So the fingerings in the low register are pretty easy for most students, but I find that sometimes students get a little confused as we approach the foot joint with their pinky because we don't use those notes so often, and it's a little bit not intuitive as you go down the scale what to do with the pinky and where to place it. So it's very important that you have the 3 sort of main fingers of the right hand squarely on the holes of your flute. And if you play an open hole flute, you have to have them right in the middle. And I recommend it even if you're playing a plateau model flute that doesn't have the open holes, which is just fine. Make sure that your fingers are nicely curved and placed right in the center of the keys there. And as we go down, we want to feel these holes and make sure they stay covered as we lift our pinky and move it over onto the foot joint. What happens is sometimes in our efforts to reach over here, our fingers slide off a hole, and that's why our low notes don't speak. Sometimes students have confusion around E flat because the pinky keys on the flute actually open a hole rather than close a hole. In most cases, as we put down a finger, we are closing a hole on the flute, and closing a hole and making the tube longer produces a lower note. But in the case of both our pinkies, we are opening a hole. The A flat key here opens a hole on the back of the flute, and the E flat key, which we are talking about here on the foot joint, opens a hole on the back of the foot joint there. And that's a little not intuitive. Some students are going down and they get their notes in the wrong order because they want to put down a finger and get a lower note. But we actually have to be fingering E flat with that pinky key and then lift off as we go down. Now, an exercise I like to do to check low notes on low G and just goes down 3 chromatic steps and back up to the main note. It sounds like this. I'm going to start on G. And then you relax, take a breath, and go down 1/2 step, starting on F sharp. Start on F. am starting on E flat where I get into this pinky business. You need to lift the pinky in the air, move it over a bit to place it onto your first key, and then eventually roll forward onto these rollers. These are rollers so that you can just slide the pinky up. So I'll finish that exercise from E flat. Hopefully you can see my right hand a bit. So you can try that exercise in a really gentle way to the lowest note that you have on your flute. It's important for the low notes that you use slow and gentle air. And if low notes are difficult for you, play them softly. Be very careful that the fingers are covering the holes all the way down. You have your fingerings correct. Just go slowly. And if you blow with slow, gentle air, you should get these notes to speak. They may be very soft. Eventually, your body will learn how to increase the airspeed just a little bit without overblowing. But a common problem with students, if those notes are not coming out at all, is actually overblowing and blowing too hard. So the low notes take very slow, gentle air and are quite soft, usually with students. If you're getting the low notes to come out and you want to develop a fuller, stronger sound down there, what you want to work on is opening up inside your mouth. The aperture should be a little larger here for low notes, and that is another thing that makes the air go slower. So it's a little bigger hole here in your lips, and you don't want to have a death grip pressing the flute really hard into your bottom chin, and you don't want to be putting your head down for low notes, which is something students do instinctively. Actually makes the notes flat and harder to produce. The hole should actually be much more open. So your bottom lip should not be on the hole very much for your lowest notes. As we play higher, we push the jaw and the lips forward. In the high register, we're on the hole more and sort of melt that lower lip onto the plate. But in the low register, we should not be. Okay, we're going to move up and talk about the other registers. Okay, this fingering chart comes from jennifercluff.com, a really nice blog by a Canadian flutist. This is a really nice intuitive fingering chart. You can see that this fingering chart starts with low C, but some of you have low B, which adds the one extra roller there, get a low B. So low notes are pretty intuitive, but if you haven't played down there a lot, you can check this fingering chart for your bottom couple notes. This top line are usually the ones that some students are unfamiliar with. And then we move up into the middle register, which is a pretty easy register for the flute. Our big problem area in the middle octave is C sharp, this note here, which, as many of you probably know, is a note that can be much too sharp and airy sounding. Like this. Any of your notes that don't have many fingers down, so C sharp, D flat especially, C natural, and B, we just don't have many fingers down on the flute, and it's called a short tube note. All the air is escaping out of all the holes of our flute. These notes tend to be too sharp in pitch and need a little help focusing down. So on that D flat or C sharp, tends to be up here, which may sound normal to you, but it really should be here. I'm looking at a tuner and that D flat is right in tune. Another trick for D flat fingering is that you can add some fingers at the right hand. This gives some stability to the flute and helps color the note and the pitch a little bit. So you can add fingers, your last two fingers. I call these fingers 5 and 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. You can add these two fingers to a D flat. Helps with the pitch and color of that note and sort of stabilizing the flute. This register here, E, F, E flat, E, and F, make sure your fingering is correct for your middle E flat and your middle D, that you have this first finger up. And around E, F, F sharp, some students have trouble with splitting and cracking on top of the staff. You need to just raise your airstream just a little bit sometimes to make sure those notes have a good color and don't crack. The register just above the staff here is a beautiful singing register for the flute, where the flute sounds really nice usually. And I'm sure all of you know these fingerings. Generally, we have the ability to play very well in tune up here. Some students are flat in this register. More often, we are sharp in this register, I would say. If you're a player that tends to be flat in this register, you're probably not blowing with enough airspeed and energy in your playing. And this is a place where you just check with the tuner. If you tend to be flat, play louder, send more fast air into the flute. Try directing the air up a little bit by pushing forward with your bottom, your chin and your jaw a little bit. Don't have a death grip and don't put the head down. Lift the head a bit up here, and that will help your pitch in this range just above the staff from, say, G up to C. If you're sharp up here in this range, you need to blow down into the flute more and cover the hole with your bottom lip. Okay, we're going to move on to high octave now. Here's our higher register of the flute, where our fingerings start to change around D. And the first few notes are easier for students, and I'm sure many of you play from D up to about high G very easily. The fingerings up here are sometimes confusing for students because they're based on lower register fingerings, but we often have a finger or two that's raised or up, and it's a matter of which hole do we open in order to assist with playing these higher notes. And sometimes we add a trill key or something a little bit different. So we really have to check the fingering chart. And this is a great fingering chart that goes all the way up to high D. Most of you need to learn up to high C in a band program, but more and more often we are seeing in some advanced band programs and in college and professional pieces for sure, we're using the C sharp and the D. So if you are good at playing up to your high C already, you can explore with this fingering chart your high C sharp and your high D if you want. But I think a high school student needs to know up to this high C. Memorize and know those fingerings. So I find that some of my college students arrive only comfortable up to high G or maybe A, and those last 3 to 5 fingerings up to high C, they're a little unsure of and need to check the fingering charts. So just use your fingering chart and go up slowly, also in half steps. And what you need is fast air, a lot of support from your ab area in your tummy to blow fast air. And you want to let those lips come forward onto the embouchure plate more. And play with the angle of air. For some students, feeling like they're blowing up higher helps get these notes out. And for quality and intonation, I encourage my students to develop flexibility of the lips, bringing the lips forward. And I have an exercise for that to show you in a minute. So D and E flat are usually pretty easy notes for students. E is a tricky note for students. This is a note that feels harder and more resistant. So this is high E natural, right? For some students, this note tends to crack and split and not want to speak. There's a reason for that. There actually are 2 holes open when you finger high E instead of 1, and we have to send our air past those 2 holes. That's the reason this note is a little bit difficult. Some of you may have a mechanism on your flute called a split E mechanism that corrects that. If E's are easier for you, one of your holes here is actually down. With an extra little lever. I don't have that design on my flute, but many student flutes are adding that mechanism. So that's nice if you have that. It makes your E easier. If E is hard for you, you need to use support from your tummy, blow fast air, and it's going to feel like you have to blow harder for an E than you do for the E flat. There's sort of a bump up in energy level there. Additionally, there's a fingering trick that you can use when you're slurring to an E. If you're slurring to an E natural from a note below up to an E, or slurring down to an E natural, that note tends to split and crack a little bit if you don't have the split E mechanism. So a trick for that I use all the time is to take your pinky off as you slur to a high E. That really helps. So try that. If you're tonguing a high E, you usually don't need that. But if you're slurring into a high E, try taking your pinky off. This is a note that's sharp. Most of our notes up here tend to be sharp in pitch, so we need to check with a tuner, not overblow, get the note, but not press too hard and direct our air down into the flute to correct that pitch. Going on from there, F is a pretty easy note that you guys are probably really good at. F sharp is difficult. It takes a lot of air. That's probably one that feels hard, just like the E, and takes more support and more pressure. And it's very sharp. G is an easy note. All right. A flat or G sharp is a hard note for students, so it's sort of every other note in the high register. E natural, F sharp, and G sharp or A flat are more resistant, takes more support and more air. All right, and then A is an easy note, A natural. Most students can produce that one fairly easily, and then it gets a little more resistant. It takes a lot of energy to play the last three notes, B flat, B, and C. Okay, you're going to feel like you have to blow really hard, definitely fast air. You want to think about pinky work in the high register and always check your high fingering and what you need to do with the pinky as we go up. It's really important on high A that you have the right hand pinky down, or that note will not come out. Okay, so that's a note that you have to have the pinky down. As you go higher, it's beneficial to have the pinky off. You'll see here on high B flat, it says optional. You can play B flat either way. This is the one note in the upper register that tends to be flat, and we actually need to raise the pitch on it. Likewise, high B comes out better without the pinky down, and high C comes out better without the pinky down or with a different foot joint key. I sometimes put down low C roller, or you can use the gizmo if you have a B foot joint that has the gizmo key. So think about what you're doing with your pinky. That sometimes is a reason that a note won't speak for you. Pinky needs to be either on or off for some of these extreme high notes. Okay, now I'm going to show you an exercise that I do to help students with getting out high notes that are resistant for them or correcting pitch. Especially most of our high notes tend to be very sharp up here, and this is an exercise that helps lower the pitch on those high notes. I call this exercise the undertone exercise because what we do is finger a high note, but we blow too slow at first, and we produce the wrong pitch. It's an undertone. It's not the pitch we're supposed to be getting with this fingering. So I'm fingering D right now, but I'm going to blow really gently. This is high D fingering. And I get a funny kind of flat C natural, much lower. That's not the right sound we're supposed to get with that fingering. But I start there blowing gently and then increase my airspeed and also search with the lips and jaw, bringing that flexibility of lips forward until I just get out a high D like this. And you approach the note from below, increasing the speed of the air and moving the lips forward a little bit, searching for that note. And just when the note speaks, you produce a soft, high note that's correct, and it's usually in tune and sometimes even flat instead of sharp. So this is approaching the note from below. You can pause the video here and try this. It's really easy to do on D and E flat, but it's often confusing for students. So this is what it sounds like to make an undertone on D and then blow faster air into the right pitch for that note. So that's a nice D that's not too sharp. Hi, this is me editing, and I realized that I forgot to explain something to you about moving into the high register with this undertone exercise, and that is that your aperture in your embouchure, that the aperture is the hole that you make between your lips. Your aperture needs to become smaller as you go into higher registers. That's one of the ways that we make faster air. We certainly do blow with more support from our abdominal area to make faster air. We also move the lips and jaw forward, and this flexibility is important, and we make the hole smaller. So when I talk about searching for the note with the undertones and approaching from below, the lips should come forward, ideally in a kiss, pucker, your duck face, and the muscles, it shouldn't be tense, but there's some strength in the aperture, and the aperture becomes smaller as we go up. So go for a smaller hole if you're someone who has trouble with high notes, or if you're working on piccolo, go for a smaller hole in your lips as you work on this exercise. Now, D is the only high fingering that has one undertone underneath it. As we go higher, we're going to go on to E flat. There are two undertones under all of the other fingerings as we go higher. So if I finger high E flat with all my pinkies down and everything, I can produce these undertones. So that last pitch was a high E flat. It's proper, and I'm playing it softly and sweetly. The first two sounds are the wrong sound. It's good to study these because if you are not getting a high note out, often what's happening is you're under supporting and dropping down to one of these undertones. So they sound weird. You want to get comfortable with them, make the best tone you can on these weird notes, and then increase airspeed. So here's undertones on E flat. Here's undertones on high E. Undertones on high F fingering. Undertones on high F sharp fingering. And that really helps students with F sharp and with G sharp, some of the resistant fingerings. You can keep taking this up all the way to high C, getting two undertones. In some cases on high A, you can get, some students get three if you cover the hole a lot, but in most cases there are two undertones under all of these high fingerings. I'll continue this from G up to high C so you hear what it sounds like. High G. Okay, and that last one I played was high C. So in doing this, approaching from below, playing the wrong sound on these high fingerings, the undertones, and just increasing the airspeed until you just get that high note to speak, teaches your body what to do with the airspeed from inside your body and the shape of your embouchure. And you approach the note in a way from below so that you arrive on it in a way that's not too sharp. And that high C was just a touch sharp, but not too bad. That's a really screamer sharp note most of the time. So this is a great way to teach your body how to get these high notes out. I hope you'll play with that. I just start here on D. You'll get one undertone on D and move on up all the way to high C, producing undertones there. Great way to work on the high fingerings. Okay, I had intended to put a vibrato exercise at the end of this video, but it is much too long. So I have decided to separate that portion that I already recorded into a separate video for you. So this video I'm going to end here just with registers and fingerings from low to high. Enjoy working on any new notes and extremes of register, and open your band folder and practice some music that's assigned for school. Have a great day, everybody.